acid when you were 11.
Yeah. Psychedelics were basically kind of like my main window into development. They really straightened me up.
So
I had so many issues.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it was the laser aspect that got you curious about. Was it the laser that did it, or it was something else that like opened you up to a bigger aspect than just kind of like chemical, sort of.
Can you define what do you mean by bigger aspect?
Well, like, I'm just trying to understand, because you've been utilizing psychedelics for a long time. So, what made it like over the top, where you say you weren't always into like the spiritual aspect of life?
So the spiritual aspect, it's not psychedelics that opened me to that. It was actually surprisingly, or not surprisingly, it was Eckhart Tolle. Somebody gifted me his second book, A New Earth.
Okay.
Funny enough, I didn't think of that, New Earth. It's the first time that I heard anyone explain something in a way that I was like, interesting. So you want to tell me that my first-person experience has components and I can pay attention to them and there's certain rules by which things happen, just like in the physical world? So that's the first time that I kind of all of a sudden realized that something is here, which again, to people that, understood it all along or understood it early on, to me it was a giant revelation.
Yeah.
I was surprised by that. And then...
when was this?
What?
When did you read the book?
It was 2008, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So this one I have to reset every 25 minutes. This one I'm looking at that.
I see, okay.
Yeah, it was 2008, and then I started reading it. I started meditating myself. You
didn't meditate before that?
No, I had no connection to any of this stuff.
But you did psychedelics regularly?
Yeah, but it was more like, obviously I felt the difference with like weed and mushrooms, but it was never like, hey, I'm going to take this to actually become a better person. It was more like, it was a relief, so I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know why it makes me feel better, I'm just doing it.
Yeah.
I loved acid, it was like my favorite thing. And then when I moved to California, when I read the book, I lived in Indiana. And then when I moved to California, I all of a sudden, so I discovered Terrence when I used to live in Indiana. I remember this now. The first talk I ever heard about from Terrence, was a short clip with the most awful audio. It's called Culture Is Not Your Friend. It's a famous one.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, and where he ends it with, it's time to call the tech. And who is the tech? The shaman. The shamans are the techs. I can almost recite the whole thing by heart, I think. And I was just mesmerized by, well, just like a lot of people, by everything about Terrence, about the way he spoke, about the way he thought. He just generated this whole new world of thinking in those directions. I never thought about that. And then I all of a sudden started taking this whole psychedelic / spiritual world into a different place where I really want to understand. I really want to understand what in fact is, what are the mechanisms by which those things happen and how we can utilize them. So I started learning about that, from contemplative literature to different modern speakers, Alan Watts, things like that. And I started meditating by myself, just like whatever I understood from it, and I started doing that. And then when I moved to California, by the way, I actually tried to extract DMT when I still lived in Indiana. It was really funny. There was this one place where they sold, they had a mimosa stilis in the backyard, and she let me just scrape some wood bark. And I tried to do it for I dated this woman who's a biologist, and she worked for the university, and she brought the whole kit, and she showed me how you, keep the pH at the right place, and how do you extract things? How do you freebase something?
Yeah.
And, I was completely oblivious to everything. So it took me like a month. I created a little bit of powder, and I didn't even have like a pipe, so I literally took a little like so ghetto. It's the most ghetto you can get. I took like a light bulb, and you break it, and then you create the thing with the straw.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah. I think I still have the video of that. It's really funny. I'm sitting there with a beanie. I look like addicted to I don't know, to crack or something, and did that. It didn't really work. There was not enough of it, and then when I moved to California, obviously I got a hold of like real DMT, and actually it didn't work for me quite a few times. At first, I guess my reality was like too pinned down to what I thought I knew it was to be, and then eventually it worked. And the first time it worked, I was just, even though I heard so much about it, I knew so much about it, but then I realized that I never really thought that this would ever be possible. And then when they took me, I was hooked. Like at that moment, I was just completely hooked. I was like, okay, this is...
What year was this?
2012.
Okay.
Or 2013, something like that. But then for years, I just loved it. I just I did it here and there, and it was just like, I just loved the ride. And then there was one defining moment, which I'm talking about it in the Soma podcast that I did, which I came back from meditation. Oh, I also started doing Vipassana retreats. That's when I really took it seriously. Like I actually started going to retreats. I started like really getting into like the techniques and like how do you work. And came back from a retreat, decided to smoked some. And I remember nothing. It was weird because I smoked a lot of it. And then 45 minutes later, I realized I'm just daydreaming. I'm just kind of looking at the ceiling. I was like, I forgot I even smoked it. I was like, huh. I was like, I smoked a lot.
Yeah.
How nothing happened? Like I'm not like you, I'm not immune to it. I'm like, that's weird. So then I sat up, and then I had the thought, actually from one of Terence's talks, actually it's in the documentary, True Hallucinations, where there's a clip of him talking about how mushrooms are not a drug, but a something like an alien disguises as a drug, intelligence, right? And then I thought for a second, I took this proposition, what if this is an actual civilization talking to us? You know how there's this dial in your brain responsible for how seriously you take propositions, right? There's a difference between thinking there's a fire and knowing there's a fire, right? There's a different physiological response to that. Yeah. So that dial to the proposition, what if this is a real civilization, went to full red. Like, wait, what if this is actually really, 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 really a civilization talking to us? Because before then, I didn't fully embody that. And the second I did that, I didn't smoke anymore. That's the weird part. The entire room flashed white, just crazy white, just like, and then I heard whispers all over the room, just like, and it was almost English. I wasn't, but it was like, it's almost, I understood it almost as clear as English. And the gist of it was, he's paying attention. What do we say? I don't know. I was like, what? Yeah. And then a frog dude appeared next to me, next to my bed. So now,
frog dude?
Bro, he looked like a person standing right next to me, as tall as the ceiling. Yeah. And I was sitting on my bed, and he appeared right next to me, and he was as tangible as you. Everything I thought I understood about the world broke in that moment. I was like, what the fuck? And then the whole room started pointing at the guitar. I had a guitar in the room. Now, I don't play. I mean, I practice, but I'm not a musician. And, in that moment, I realized, the whole room is like, guitar, go do guitar. And I'm like, I don't know music theory. You won't be able to communicate to me this way. I'm just like playing. And the room is just insisting. I was like, okay. So I get up, I go to the guitar, I pick it up, and it disappears from that side of the room and appears right next to me like this. Like this.
The guitar.
The frog dude.
The frog dude.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he's like putting his frog fingers on the thing like this. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm like following what he's doing. And I go, brrrr, and music starts coming out. So essentially, he's saying, you don't know how to do this. I'm real. This is real information. And now, there's no one in the room, so I can't prove it to anyone. Yeah. And also, I can be confused, of course. Yeah. But I don't think I was. As far as I can tell, I was pretty clear on that. And I was like, okay. And then it started subsiding. The experience started subsiding because DMT started subsiding. But I knew in that moment nothing will ever be the same. And in fact, it's really funny because in the other room I had a Airbnb guest who was a postdoc in physics from Italy, Marco, and I just yelled his name because I was like, Marco! And then I was like, what are you going to tell him? It was 2 a.m. Did the frog dude from another dimension taught you how to play the guitar? Like, he'll be out of here tomorrow morning, the first thing. So I was like, okay. So then I called a best friend of mine, who we've done a lot of psychedelics together. He came over at 3 a.m. That's how good of a friend he is. Because I was like, okay, you got to come over here immediately, now. And he's like, he just drove all the way to me. And even he, when I told him that, like everything that was going on, he literally told me, okay, you need to lay down. Because he thought, like, I'm going crazy.
Yeah.
So from that day, my relationship to what I think is going on immediately changed. So that was just the I guess the straw that broke the camel's back.
What year was that?
2017, I think, or 18.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, I still lived in Westwood. So in that moment, for me personally, I knew this has no way that this is just in my brain. There's just no way.
Okay.
This is too coherent, too on point, and like Terrence always pointed out, it's too, there's too much architecture that is coherent and continuous, and there's a lot that is going on that is very similar to physical matter without being physical matter. Yeah. And I was like, okay, this is not coming from me, it's too bizarre.
But still overlaying somewhat with this reality, because there was a...
No, of course. Yeah. No. I saw everything the same. By the way, that's a really good point. I guess what was so different about that experience is that usually with DMT, you kind of go to a place, right? I was fully with my eyes open, interacting with the world, and yet this whole content was overlaid on top of the real situation, but in a very real way. Yeah. He felt like you feel. Yeah. Like, how you just know someone is in the room? Yeah. That's how he felt. It wasn't fuzzy. So from that point on, I got obsessed. I started researching online. I started reading accounts and reports. And I saw that actually a lot of people report this, which they talk about, yes, DMT feels very real, but they emphasize, they say, no, this is ultra real. This is like extra. Yeah. And so I realized there's other people like this. And there was this really funny account that I actually read of a therapist from Florida who used to have the same thing where aliens would just talk to him on a regular basis.
On DMT? Or?
On DMT, yeah. Okay. And he just got obsessed with it, and he almost stopped working, and he was just doing this all day. And every time, it wouldn't really yield any fruit, but it was always happening to him. So he got obsessed with it. Eventually, he had to go to another shrink that told him, you actually gotta stop smoking that. Yeah. Like, you don't have aliens talking to you. And from that moment on, every time I would smoke DMT, the experience would be completely different from me. So it was like a phone call. Like I'm just talking to them every single time. And then I got obsessed with the question of like, how do we decipher this? How do we decide whether it's a real space or not? There has to be answers here. And then, of course, I discovered that there's a whole community in the world, people who do this, like there's whole organizations that do this. And but nobody seems to have an answer. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to help figure out the answer. And the thing that kept on coming back to me, I had some understanding of physics. I was like, okay, well, something kept on telling me like light. Light seems to have something to do with it. There's a lot of properties to light from a technical standpoint that seems to play with the margins of what is possible because the speed of causation, because of a lot of reasons. And then a few years later, probably 3 years after that, I stumbled upon those numbers on the floor that I'm showing in the video. And then I started following that track that eventually, after another 2 years, actually in Colorado, funny enough, while we were on a little trip with my girlfriend, we started going down this rabbit hole with like different papers, and we arrived at this conclusion of like 650 nanometer diffracted laser, something is supposed to happen. I didn't know what, it kept on pointing to that. It's like, okay, so I bought the laser, pandemic hit, it was actually very difficult to get a laser, so I ordered one from China, it took it 3 months to get here. See, there's always this like kind of like postponing, right? And then when it finally got there to me, and I built the circuit, and I built the thing, and I turned it on, and I saw it, I actually thought I lost my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because numbers were talking to me. I was aiming towards this very novel goal in which I'm going to make this discovery. And here I am staring at this thing that it panned out.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, at that moment, my main goal was to show people because otherwise it means I'm insane.
Mm-hmm.
So I started showing people, and luckily, everybody started seeing it.
Okay.
And then slowly, I got more and more traction. I released the video, and here we are. That basically is how I landed to be in this position,
Yeah.
in discovering it. So now that I don't know how it ended up being me, giving such a long answer, but here we are.
Yeah.
And, how you doing, John? Well, welcome to my podcast in which I'm talking only about myself. I appreciate you coming here.
No, I mean, I'm learning about you, man. So it's that's the way to do it, you know, is
Yeah.
discussing your story, not just mine.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you gave me the window to tell this. I never told it fully in the podcast. I just did it in the video I released.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm here with you, John Chavez, and I got to know about you through, well, obviously you run in the psychedelic circles, and you're very active in the sense of pushing the dial in trying to understand our innate abilities of not just healing ourselves, but create like actually tapping into our true potential and what we're capable of. Yeah. And from what I understand from you so far, you take the fact that those things are possible with substances and different external ways, and you say, okay, well, those things just modulate what our brain are doing. How do we go into a place where we understand how to do it naturally? Would that be a fair summation of?
I guess it's more so how do you communicate these things, right? Because I had a mystical experience in 2013. Prior to that, I wouldn't call myself a materialist, but I had no concept of anything greater than physical reality, normal baseline reality. It was you wake up, you experience reality, you go to sleep, you might have a dream or two, but there was nothing really in between. In 2013, that changed for me. I had a deep mystical experience based on a health crisis, really, and it was a healing crisis that occurred. And then I got pretty much just thrust into the whole concept of mind over matter, mind controlling or having an influence on reality, and that it really changed me since then. I had no interest in psychedelics prior. I had no interest in anything spiritual before, or whatever could be deemed spiritual, supernormal, supernatural. But like I said, I got thrown into that space. I would say kicking and screaming a bit. And it lasted quite some time, so it allowed me to, I guess, play with it. I get comfortable with it and discuss it with other people and actually have some sort of, I guess you would call it, displaying of some of these concepts. And, I became a seeker. Like right after that, I just started reading a book a week. I was like really amazed that it wasn't as if it was something new to the world. It's been around for a long time. And there was people actually exploring it currently. And even since the early 1900s, scientists were looking at people with abilities. I mean, even the EEG, right? Hans Berger designed it based on a telepathic experience.
Wait, okay, so finish your story about you because I want to go back to that. I did not know that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is all part of the story, is that a lot of people don't know. Like, you have neuroscientists all across the world using EEG to measure brain activity. You're measuring the microelectric currents on the brain. It was designed because Hans Berger had a telepathic experience with his sister. This was like in the 1920s or something. I think he had an injury, like he fell off a horse or something, and his sister sent a telegram for him. I don't remember the exact story, but the bottom line is that he designed the EEG back then because he knew that there was communication between two people, and he wanted to see if there was a way to measure that. And they still use this device to this day, and it's not known. A lot of people don't know as to why it was designed, but yeah, basically...
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's crazy, but it's not, because I think that a lot of insights will come from altered states of consciousness, things that aren't baseline. And that's what people need to really recognize, is that a lot of insights don't come from normal waking consciousness.
Maybe most of them.
Most of them, yeah. Like there was a
Like the big revelations is just people come in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, look at John Cunios's work at Drexel University, right? He pinned down the neural correlates of the aha moment, the eureka moment. And interestingly enough, there's like a spike in the fast oscillation of the brain, the gamma wave spike, right? And when people are long-term meditators, they're able to oscillate at the gamma wave regularly. Psychedelic experiences all take place within the gamma frequency. So it's almost like when people talk about having a psychedelic experience and having revelations, it's almost like they're just having like a consecutive sequence of aha moments. So I mean, this is stuff that I ended up writing. It wasn't really like, I started an anonymous blog because I really wanted to just sort out what I thought were the biomechanisms of this, or how it could be presented to the world. So I started an anonymous blog, Questions for the Lion Tamer, Q4LT.com. I just put my initials, JC. I didn't want to be judged by my lack of credentials, my name. I just wanted to put a theory out there. So I started to see if I could tie in the theory of DMT, endogenous DMT, with supernormal sort of experiences and abilities. And I did that because what happened is after my mystical experience in 2013, I kept in touch with people. I'd worked in the biotech space for about a decade. And in my journey of trying to explain a mystical experience to them, they were just dismissive completely. And then I would look through the literature and try to show, I guess, proof of it in the literature, and it was still dismissed completely. Even if it was pretty decent data shown by the literature of these supernormal occurrences. So I was like, well, how can I convey an experience or an ability if people from that sort of mindset, scientific mindset, do not accept even peer-reviewed papers? So then I went down the rabbit hole of just having more conversations with different people. I had a cousin in medical school at the time. I started trying to have a discussion with him about this supernormal stuff, and he was like, just dismiss it. And he's like, look at DMT. I'd never heard of DMT back then. This was already 2013. So it just shows you I was not interested in the space at all. And so I looked up DMT, and I was like, wow, the spirit molecule, it's labeled as that. And it's produced within the body? Intriguing. So I was like, maybe there's a way to tie in this quote-unquote spirit molecule with, spiritual abilities. So I started to look at, I read Rick Strassman's book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, saw the documentary. And then I just start with the most basic aspect of, maybe when we're dreaming, we're producing DMT, because dreaming would be considered a hallucinatory phenomenon, and DMT is considered a hallucinogen. So then I started to look at basically all the physiological changes that take place in the brain and in the body when we're sleeping. And it was pretty clear that there's a vast fluctuation in changes. So it made me more comfortable with the concept that during these supernormal experiences, like a dream, there was measurable correlates to it. So that's kind of where I started, was trying to really get the mechanisms of the dream state. And then I started to look at the meditation literature and the hypnosis literature and even moments of insight. And there seemed to be...
What is moments of insight?
Like aha moments, eureka moments. And that's where I came across John Cunios's work. He's been studying that at Drexel University for a long time. And there was a lot of correlations and synergy and overlap between even small things like aha moments and meditation and things like that. So I started to get my writing legs under me, because I was reading a lot, but you don't really sort out your thoughts until you write, and even more so until you write for the public and you get feedback. I think that's really important. That was really important for me, at least, is not just to do a private journal, but was to put out thoughts and get feedback. I was on Twitter, shooting it at people. It's like, what do you think? And it would get completely ripped apart. And I was like, I like that, because it helps you come up with a better way to present it, and wherever you were wrong, you could make that right, and you just keep going from there. And eventually I just started reading more, writing more, a lot more peer-reviewed sources, and people within the psychedelic community like Dennis McKenna started reading the blog, and he got interested, not knowing who I was. I think Guy Harriman, the founder of the Ajna Light, is the one who started forwarding my stuff to Dennis, and we got in contact. And I got invited to the second Tyringham event by Anton Bilton. He's a leader in the space in terms of exploratory research regarding DMT. And he was like, I'm interested in some of your work. Do you have a book or anything? So what I ended up doing was compiling the blog into a book. So basically the book is just like compilation of blogs. It was like 33 chapters, 33 blog posts. So I put it together, put the book cover, it's just self-published, and then I sent it to him. And he's like, this is wild shit. Like, let's have you go to this symposium. So that's my first foray. I think that was like 2017. Dennis was there. Ralph Messner from Harvard was there. Bill Richards from Johns Hopkins was there. Like a lot of people that, I didn't know who they were because I wasn't really immersed in the space. So I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to see what it's about, because I was really trying to focus on fundraising for research. Because what I realized was that in this journey is that there was barely any research about endogenous DMT. There was a 2013 paper out of Michigan, right? The pineal gland study or whatever. But it was like, okay, it's 2017, where's the next study? And that's when I got the idea to create like DMT Quest or something to help fundraise for endogenous DMT because it wasn't taking place. And it was obvious that there was like a public interest in it. Joe Rogan been talking about it and other people like London Real. I just saw like stuff come up on YouTube, and it was like, well, there's public interest in this, and it's super interesting. So we should be able to find a way to get this stuff funded, for the scientists. So that's why I went to Tyringham. The first one was to, see if I could interest Anton or just sort of get the ball rolling, and that's what happened. So 2017, I go there, and basically. What happened is that James O'Rourke, he was the author of Tryptamine Palace. He focused on 5-MeO. He was from Australia, I believe, or New Zealand. His flight got canceled, and they asked me to present. Like, they asked me if I wanted to present, and I had, like, I think 12 hours to prepare, in front of all these people. And I was like, fuck it, let's do it, So I just go on my computer, just going crazy, and I put up together a little presentation. And I presented to everybody, and it was crazy and wild. But after, like, Dennis was like, we needed that, man, because there was a lot of scholars there, and they present like scholars, and it's very like upper echelon, high etiquette stuff. And me, I'm just a random guy, going nuts. So, we had some fun with it, and Anton liked it, and Dennis liked it, and yeah, ever since then I've been in, going to the Tyringham events and just meeting people, and at this point it looks like we're starting to get some traction. I'm just excited for the scientists, excited for the world to just be more informed about not just like the molecule itself, but the potential for humans. I think that's really where the excitement really lies from my perspective.
The idea that there's more, but from more of a rigorous scientific perspective.
Yeah, enough science. You want to stay true to the science, and you want to put together like compelling media around it, because media runs the world, right? Science, you can have like a really important study, but if it's not covered by the media,
yeah, nobody's reporting it, nobody knows.
Yeah, that's what I asked people in my presentation was in the 2017 one, because there was like a really interesting study that showed that blood platelets were found to have been created in the lungs. But for the longest part, it was thought to be only like the bone marrow or something. So I asked everybody, like, where's the platelets made? And, somebody said, like, the spleen, and somebody said bone marrow. And I was like, y'all are wrong. It seems to be predominantly in the lungs, but because of lack of media, people don't know about it. So it's just an example of, the DMT stuff. Like, everybody should know about it, right? So we need, like, a big media sort of push to get it out there. And we could level up society like as a whole all at once, right? Like every time a new study comes out, it doesn't even have to be just DMT. It could be periphery research that's really intriguing as well, right? Like, things that go along with, the whole mind over matter, altered states of consciousness aspects, tapping into that. So,
So you're always thinking about how to package the news
how to
that come out
present.
from this.
Yeah, how to present is key because, the reason why I think DMT is so powerful is because it's a perfect starting point for discussion. It doesn't create cognitive dissonance right off the bat, right?
You mean in the sense that in what way? In the fact that so many people experience similar things, or in what way?
No. What I'm referring to is you want to discuss anything mystical or spiritual, there's no other, I guess, reductionist term that can create like an umbrella. And the fact that DMT is an undeniable, right?
Yeah.
It's
well,
an
to whomever done it.
No, not even if you've never done it. It's a molecule that exists.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, but I mean just the effect.
Well,
Right.
even if what I'm saying is the undeniable is that it is a molecule that it exists. So it's a reductionist term for the potential, right? Basically, what it's become, to me, it's become synonymous for the full spectrum of potential.
Yeah.
We're talking about ET, UFO, being experience at its most extreme, to like out of body experience, to near death experience, which is even
I see what you're
more
saying.
transcendental.
All of those things, people can say them, but
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, you're just saying it.
Yeah.
And here you have like, look, I've ingested this thing that exists, and I can show you that it exists. And that's what I'm saying that happens, but the thing itself exists. I can show you that it exists.
Yeah, or it exists naturally within the body, right?
Right.
So it can contribute to things like near-death experience, out-of-body, meditative, transcendental experiences, and even more. So that's what I'm saying. It's umbrella for endogenous DMT and then also the exogenous craziness, right? So it's like a full blanket term that can really cover a lot of ground. And because it's a molecule that exists within the human body, it's undeniable. So you can start a conversation from there. And usually the skeptic will say, well, yeah, it's a hallucinatory molecule, so people are having hallucinatory experiences. So what was interesting to me is that, like, okay, let's take that argument and like lean into it, like even more. Where it's like, hallucinations to me are like things like conscious hallucinations to me are like mental imagery or visualization. Things that Olympic athletes use to, I guess, create progress in their performance without actually doing the physical
Oh,
activity.
envisioning the thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Was that studied and proven?
what, mental imagery for Olympic
Yeah,
athletes?
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
I
really?
mean, they've been doing this all across the world for decades now, mental imagery.
So
Yeah.
just to clarify, basically athletes would imagine themselves doing whatever the thing is over and over and over again, and they would actually measurably perform better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, this is nothing new, right? It's just the world is not really aware of these things, right? So, I mean, it's Olympic athletes, top-level sports teams, definitely.
And this is, I don't mean to cut you off, but this is something that for me, I'm now in the space of talking to people because of the discovery. And one of the biggest pushbacks that I get a lot, especially from a much more scientifically oriented people, is this whole idea of hallucinations come up. And I think for people who've never done it, and I completely understand, who never even came close to that world, it's a complete black box to them. And it's just like the blanket statement, you hallucinated, end of story.
Yeah.
And I realized that that's such a, because there was something about that particular, I don't mind when people push back. I actually love it because it gives me, like you said, it gives me the idea of what is it that triggers people, or what is it that bothers people, and we can address that. But there was something about that particular comeback that felt off, and I could not for the longest time figure out why. And then I realized, oh, it's because it's an infinitely elastic argument. Like, you can actually say that about anything. So because it's infinite, it makes no difference, because it's like it gives you no explanation. It's like you just hallucinated. Well, yeah, the brain is a Turing machine. It can create infinite amount of potential content.
Yeah.
So to say that you hallucinated, so therefore it wasn't real, you're not saying anything, because technically the brain can produce all of it. But you're not actually saying anything. Unless you address the specific content and how it relates to what in fact is happening,
Yeah.
you're not saying anything. You're just saying, oh, you just got wet when you got into the shower. You didn't explain water and the molecules and how that occurs. You didn't touch any of that.
Yeah.
You just put a thing on it, right?
Yeah.
And I realized that, yeah, the question should not be whether it's possible that it was a hallucination and nothing else. Because the answer to that question is yes, and it's always yes. But the question should be, can we create a line, a demarcation line that tells us it's either one or the other? Can there be a test that can help us think about this in like terms
Yeah.
of real and not real? And everything you're doing, and by the way, I'm starting to understand more and more the reason for your focus, because for the longest time, I think that it wasn't really clear to me what is it that intrigues you so much about the specifics of the communication. And now I'm starting to understand it's the tangibility of certain things that are not being reported because they're just being swept under the rug, under the rubric of a machine that doesn't make a lot of money out of it. So basically, like you have, all those scientific studies that are being funded, and they're funded only if the investors usually know what the final word on their ROI is, right? But if they don't see that, then it's much harder to get funding, and especially when you're talking about like fringe stuff, then that thing is just being completely pushed to the side.
Yeah.
But what if that's where real progress will actually occur?
Yeah.
So somebody has to take the role of putting those things to the forefront so more people will be aware of them even.
Yeah, and the fact that there's just so much money on the sidelines. There's so many like individual philanthropists. Well, there's like 3,300 billionaires in the world sitting on trillions of dollars. So the money's out there. There's, even if you take like 5% of them that are open to supernormal, mystical, whatever type of experiences, or even 3%, there's more than enough funding. So we just need to get them on board. But to me, it's the communication of this thing. Like, I'm not like, huge psychedelic user, but I know people that really believe that the experiences that they've had are tangible. So I've always kind of ruminated with that in my mind, is that how would one go about, like, quote unquote, proving that, right? And I think that it's never going to be like one study that does it. I think it's going to be dozens upon dozens of periphery studies and direct studies that really start to chip away at that, right? Like the Big Bang Theory didn't like get its claws into society based on one like aspect of it. There was like piles and piles of things that who knows whether it's true or not. It's just like something that it's just so many scientists got on board after decades, I'm assuming, or maybe even longer, to really have that theory get legs,
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that what solidifies the theory, I think the perfect example is the theory of relativity. That, Einstein came up with special relativity, I think it was like 1905, and general relativity a few years later, I don't remember exactly, maybe 1911. But it never became a full-fledged theory, and Einstein never became a full-fledged celebrity until there was one experiment with that involved an eclipse, in which they could see that the margin of error that was in Newton's equations, like, because Newton's equations gave us most of what was possible to measure.
Yeah.
But when it came to like the really big, when it came to actual, where, according to Einstein, space literally itself like bends light, that was not taken into account. And that experiment proved that is actually a much more accurate way of seeing the world. So unless there's like an experiment that we can point to, and then all the body of evidence that existed before, or even circumstantial evidence, becomes much more palatable for way more people.
Yeah.
And people feel comfortable, even very smart people feel comfortable getting into that and like really putting all their efforts into it.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think that unless we can show this one step at a time, and we can show some experiments that do this again and again and again and again, most of the public will never be open to it. So that actually brings me to a very specific thing I wanted to ask you about. Because you've done a little bit of like, guiding people through like energy work and how you can manifest different feelings in the body. I think you said that you don't really do it on a regular basis. It's not like your main forte, right? But from your experience with that, how many people, if you have to measure in percentages, can go through, never experienced it before, were never open to it, to full-fledged, like, holy shit, something is here, like percentage-wise, how much would you say?
What's a specific example?
Well, let's say somebody comes to you is like super skeptical, and you're like, well, actually, you can do this and this and this, and you can control where you feel heat in the body, like, right? how many people go into this skeptical, and then you show them the technique, and then they go, "Oh shit, I can actually do that," and it really kind of like spins them on a dime.
Yeah, it's 9 out of 10 people.
Really?
Yeah,
So
because it's so simple. I mean, it's 15 minutes of audio, and I just say, focus on it. Like, spend some time, like, get in a quiet, whatever area where you're not disturbed, and if you can have focus, then let's see what happens. And it's been mainly skeptics that have been like, wow, I didn't know that that was even possible. Like something as simple as visualizing a fire in the middle of your hand when you're in like a sedated, trance-altered state, and you start to feel heat in your hand. And these periphery sort of biofeedback has been around for decades. I mean, this is nothing new. This is just new to baseline consciousness people, right?
Right. But I guess the different story begins when the claims are starting being made about that this can extend outside of your body. Mm-hmm. That's where it starts becoming more like harder to swallow for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, of course, because they don't even know that they could do this, right? They don't even know that they could like visualize a change within their own body. So how the hell would they even be open to the concept of visualizing a change that has an effect outside of someone's body? But you have to start somewhere.
I see what you're saying. So basically, you are very sensitive to where's the level of openness of society versus the people that are really committed to like believe in that stuff. Mm-hmm. And you want to be able to communicate to a larger layer of people, even if they're, hardcore materialists, or like you want to provide evidence that is undeniable, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so basically I studied, after the mystical experience, I was surprised that there was so much literature from early 1900s up until today, right? Like, that this had been studied by reputable people, and they looked at it like very rigorously. So it's not just science. You're realizing that it has to be presented in a certain order. There needs to be a media component to it. It needs to be presented in a palatable manner. Like I said, DMT offers a very strong communicative aspect for things that are deemed to be supernormal. And there does seem to be a correlation between potentially like DMT and the gamma wave, so a faster oscillation in the brain. When you take ayahuasca or DMT or 5-MeO, they see the surge in the gamma. When you do it in the meditation or hypnotic states or sensory deprivation, they see a surge in the gamma. So there seems to be something important in terms of faster oscillation, faster processing human potential. And that kind of makes like a linear sense to an average materialist, right? They would be like, that would kind of make sense. If your brain is operating at a faster speed, there might be more potential, right? There might be something there. So it's just looking at, multi-layered things. If it's not just chemical, it's electrophysiological changes. And when you tie in the chemical with electrophysiology, then it opens like the aspect of a layer of electromagnetism, right? And that's a layer that's obviously all around us all the time. So you need to be able to have, I guess, multiple discussions about changes in physiology all at once to create those communicative bridges. Because right now people think DMT is just chemical. So how could that correlate with telepathy, right? That doesn't.
Wait, why is the connection? Why are you making like why would that matter? Like if telepathy? Oh, because telepathy has to be natural somehow, or
No, well, it's like, what would be the carrier of information?
oh, what is the medium through which it's moving? Oh,
right? I mean, just naturally speaking, we know Wi-Fi exists around us, and that takes place over the electromagnetic spectrum. So the way that the modern society has become is that we model the natural world based on our technology, right? We did that with the sun. Before we came up with nuclear reactors, we had a different model for the sun. But after we built nuclear reactors, now the sun's a nuclear reactor because it's based on our technological prowess or whatever. And, so basically it's about presenting these concepts, overlaying technology, whether it's even correct or not, just so it's more palatable, right? Because from what I understand, a lot of the telepathy stuff, it's really tricky, They've done a lot of research regarding, is it electromagnetic based? And some people think yes, a lot of people think no, because, there's communication that takes place over long distances. So
that's a really confusing one to me, the telepathy one. because as someone who's looking from the outside, and I am for all intents and purposes from the outside for this, because I'm not, and this is something I should probably, actually dive deeper into. But because I hear both camps. Like I hear you saying this is already like established in many circles, and then I hear other scientists who don't seem to be closed-minded. They just seem to be, they do seem to be plugged in. They say, oh, this is like, we looked at the statistical data, it's complete nonsense. And then once again, you have people like Dean Radin, who is somewhat a respectable scientist, and then he says, no, actually the margin of error that we allow in, let's say, drug testing is way lower than what we see at the sigma of what we measure in that kind of research.
Yeah.
So educate me. What is the actual current state of affairs in that regard, specifically with telepathy? Is there really like a robust amount of data that we're just ignoring at the moment?
Well, let me see this. I don't think the data is that good, to be quite honest. Just to be straight up, I don't think that the experiments have been designed well to show. I think that you have to focus on the mechanisms of it, right? So theoretically, if telepathy were to take place, you would see synchronization between two people, right? Whether it's heart rate variability or the brainwave frequencies. And I think that needs to be focused on rather than information transfer. At least to
watching
start.
the mechanisms kind of do
Well,
their
at
thing.
least to see somebody be able to influence another person physiologically, right? You have to start there before you jump into like information transfer. And I think that's really what's been holding the field back is let's first establish that somebody can influence another person's autonomic signaling or their brain frequencies at a distance, without touching them. Even if it's like 1 foot away or 3 feet away. Let's show unequivocally that intent can have an effect on another. And then from there, you can build from there. But if that hasn't been established, if it hasn't been shown unequivocally that consciousness can extend past your physical body in a cut and dry manner, in multiple experiments, highly trainable, then that's where we're missing. That's just the way I look at it.
No, this is music to my ears. I'm listening very attentively because when I talk to people about the laser, one of the first things that always comes up is like, well, can you have other people, like write it down or something to compare? I'm like, it's the wrong question. Like, first, let's establish that a lot of people are actually seeing, like, first of all, a lot of people are blown away when they see it. Let's start there. That should be your first data point. It's not, when people see something that is truly out of the ordinary, or that their face alone should be a data point for you, right? Obviously, that's not the end of the story, but that's where you should focus first. Like, you need to establish they're actually seeing something that is ordinary. And then the question of like, well, how do you know it's similar? Great question. But let's first establish that they're all seeing something that is unique. After that, we can talk about how we together design an experiment that showed with more details. So everything you're saying about telepathy, I feel the same way about this, the laser thing. You're saying, first let's establish that we can actually even show what if people can do it, but they can do it not that great. So that means it doesn't exist? No, let's show in some manner that they can actually occur. And then when enough people establish that, okay, now let's look at if we can talk about specifics. Can I send you a number from my head? Can I do this? Can I do that?
Yeah, and establishing the mechanisms, like why does it take place in some people and not others, right? Are they in a distinct altered state that facilitates that experience to happen? Because obviously it's not happening all the time for everybody. So what's the difference, right? So if we nail down those correlates of the physiological correlates of what allows that to happen at a higher rate or higher effectiveness or regularity, just influence at a distance, not telepathy. Let's not call it healing even, right? Let's just call it mental imagery, being able to influence autonomic signaling of another. Right?
Yeah, let's show that any signal is going across, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it's at. That's where the game is at. So I'm just throwing it out there to your audience. Anybody who wants to run with that.
What do you say to people on the other side of this? That people that say, people that are really, really spiritual or already doing, some kind of energy work or something from that world, and there's this tendency, which I'm not knocking down. I'm just saying when I'm exposed to it, I'm a little confused by it. So I want to see what your thoughts about it. People who say, for example, when you're trying to talk to them about mechanisms, they say, well, that actually doesn't matter. All that matters is if the person, if they went through a positive transformation, which I'm all for. Of course, we want to try and help as many people as possible. But what I'm confused by is that if you have this ability, or you see that you can on a regular basis move people from being, confused about the world to less confused about the world and suffer less, why wouldn't you be interested in a mechanism? Sometimes I get this like vibe. There's like somehow understanding the mechanism is supposed to ruin something about that experience or about the potential to have that experience. It's almost like they're hinting at like the more you're going to try and understand the mechanisms, the more you're running away from the thing that is trying to heal through you. You know what I mean? Like
they're already there, man. You don't. That's not your audience.
Sorry, who is? Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Like that, you're not trying to convince them of these things, right? They're already aware that these things exist. They're not interested in the science or the mechanisms of it, and they don't have to be. Your audience, like, if you're approaching this as a scientific endeavor, I mean, who's your audience, right? It's more on the materialist side, more scientists. So, if you're talking to the light workers and the psychics, like, that's not your audience, right?
I see what you're saying.
So it's like, why?
That's a really good point.
You can't really focus on convincing them to read, like.
Oh, no. I'm not trying to convince them. I guess what I'm asking, and this is more like an open question, I'm just having a hard time conceptually to imagine that somebody wouldn't be interested in how to do it better. Like, how to do it at scale, how to teach other people how to do that. Because, the great thing about technology, as much as we knock down technology a lot, is that it's completely democratic. It doesn't matter who you are, and this is one of the things about DMT. It's completely democratic. You don't have to study for a million of years to do 20 years to do this or that. You smoke it, most chances you're going, right?
And it's already inside you. Everybody.
Yeah, so and that too. But the point is that technology doesn't care how and who and well, it works. If something is true, it works, right? So why wouldn't you be interested in knowing how those things occur? Because you can translate your ability to somebody else's, and then you have more people healing. I think that's the confusing part about it for me. Not that I'm trying to convince them.
Yeah.
It's just that the lack of interest in the mechanism, to me personally, is confusing. So I wanted to see what your thoughts on that. But you nailed it. You said know who you're talking to.
But also, I think they want to see it packaged a certain way, right? I mean, they're not interested in going on that journey with you of figuring out the mechanism. But if you give them something to look at, like a documentary that's digestible, that most of the hard work in terms of deciphering the mechanisms and all the lab stuff can be presented in a way that like supports their endeavors.
So talk their energies, talk their vibe, basically.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that's the feedback I got from the first DMT Quest documentary. Like, there was really good feedback from scientists. They were like, "Wow, you were true to the science," but it was also from the mystics. They were like, "This helps me like show my scientist friends and materialists stuff that I never really got into, but is presented in a way that helps create a bridge."
I see. Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's more so about creating something. I mean, you can't expect the mystics to be overly technical in a lot of ways, right? Not because they're stupid; they just have their interests and the way that they think. But if you can create content that can support their endeavors, then I think that's where you reach them. Not on the journey of specific hardcore like scientific.
No, that's a great point. Not so much try and obsess about get everybody on board and trying to understand the mechanisms.
Yeah.
Some people are interested in that. Some people are interested in developing the abilities themselves, and it's a big space, and everybody needs to play their role. So that's a great answer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see yourself surrounded more with people from the scientific camp or the spiritual workers, or it's really kind of split right in the middle?
I try to keep myself right in the middle. I mean, I've leaned heavily more towards the science because obviously, discussing scientific endeavors with scientists. But I like to explore like what the mystics are talking about, what they're doing, because I need to kind of remain tapped into that community. I guess I know there's a part of me that just likes it, parts of it, not all the time, because a lot of what we're doing is very grounded, it's very earthly, it's very kind of just 3D work, right? We're creating a sort of platform to do this, and we got to get the science funded, and we got to do the films on them and all that stuff. But, I'm still very much interested in the human potential as a whole and what people are exploring, on a regular basis, and how it all ties into the bigger picture, right? Because there is a big picture of what reality is. right?
That's the biggest question for me personally, yeah. What it really is. One of the things I always say is the craziest fact for me is that whatever the case may be, there's an actual answer. There's an actual reason as to why everything exists. It's such a mind-numbingly insane thought to me.
Yeah.
It's like, it didn't have to be. But really think about it. Like, whatever the thing is, it is. Which is just, I guess it's like, do you believe in God?
Yeah.
Like the All Father Almighty? Like, how does it come to you? Like the image?
There's no image. It's just, that's a hard question, man.
It is a hard question.
It's it's not an image because it just seems like it's way more complex than an image, you know. It's
I take your correction. So I guess how does it appear to you when you utter the word or think of it as a concept at all?
Yeah, the ultimate complexity. That's the way I think of it. Complexity beyond complexity, but also creativity beyond creativity. That's what it feels like. It feels overwhelming to pin down to anything, really.
Yeah. No, I think obviously it's not it's not a question with an answer, but I was just interesting.
Yeah, that's just what it feels
so
like.
I guess in my model of how I imagine about it, it's like I keep repeating it to people. It's not that I'm saying by no means that I think this is the ultimate truth. I'm just saying that's a interesting thought to me, that God is that almost perfect object that kind of knows and can do almost anything. And that one thing that it cannot do is to know why. Like, it's the one thing that is lacking even in the ultimate object.
Why? What do you mean?
Even God doesn't know why everything exists. That's the thought.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that.
No, I'm not putting it as a final answer. I'm saying that's a thought that I've been toying with because somehow it makes sense to me that like everything is happening because God is asking the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the final thing. It's almost like the ultimate. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, this is by no means am I expecting like an answer. I'm just throwing it out there like as a thought. It's just like it's a very kind of like it's a disturbing and a very profound thought to me, which it did not originate with me. I think it came to me in like one of the visions actually.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true. I think that if I have to make my wildest guess is that like the materialist in me, whatever remained of him at this point, and I think some of it will always remain, because I always think like if there's a mechanism by which, I'm fully with you with the mechanisms, because I think the word mechanism for people means something very technical, but I think all mechanism means is that something that influences something else, right? So if something is related to something functionally in any form, whatever, physical, not physical, doesn't matter, it has some kind of a way by which it caused that thing to happen. And if that's the case, then it's linked in that way. And if it cannot do that, then those islands of no influence on each other are indistinguishable from not existing for one another. But if it influenced you in any shape or form, that is the mechanism. That's all I mean. So just to clarify what I mean by mechanism. So if I'm thinking about it, there has to be, whatever the truth may be, there has to be an initial condition, and then, like, how do you get out of that? Like, how does that condition come to be? And then, so it turtles all the way down. But I think that what makes sense to my still materialist side is that it's not what we think of as like the ultimate, God Almighty, but what we call that is the most advanced civilization possible. What they achieve, like the highest accolade of technical sophistication. And then for them, the final unanswered question is the final challenge, which is fun, and and then they put all their efforts to try and like answer that question.
Yeah.
And I think that makes perfect sense to me. But I'm fully aware that is probably a still very limited view of what the.
What do you mean by technological sophistication? Like that's
anything that is possible in all spatial, temporal dimensions, directions, that can be done, they can do it. create universes, whip out like just like things that we can't even imagine, like all of it.
You think that's the goal?
That's a great question. I think that one of the things that confuse me a lot of times when I'm in the DMT space is how neurotic it feels versus how enlightened in comparison to that even some people can be. That's very confusing to me because it does feel way more advanced than us, but many times, specifically with DMT, it feels like it's like this infinite ability to do things, but without the wisdom of like even some people that I know. Like, you know, just like some people just like, just let it go. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It kind of confused me that like such an advanced species, if in fact this is what's going on, would not have this ability to just drop it. You know, just enjoy their abilities and not seek this infinite need to answer all the questions. Somebody told me, I forget who it was, I think it was Justice in my podcast. He painted this picture that I actually, it's a simple picture that I never thought about and I really liked. He said, but what if God is more just tending to his garden? He's just the ultimate gardener. He's just tending to, he doesn't care, like you're saying about when, as in he's telling me, so like I'm saying, he doesn't care about the answer. He knows, doesn't know, doesn't matter. He's just tending to his plants, to his universes, and that's all he does. I'm like, never thought about that. That's also a beautiful picture. Like it makes just as much sense, right? In those ultimate terms. And I think that in the end of the day, how we live our life is how we tacitly assume that God lived his ultimate being. It's almost like if we, like the person in me who wants this infinite drive towards the answer, almost prefers this idea that like even God has this like need to know, right?
Yeah.
But people with a little bit more of like a just drop it attitude would look at way more at the in the way that he described with the garden, and that's what I mean by by ultimate sophistication, which is like a civilization that can basically do that. And the only other idea that I feels that surpassed the weirdness for me was actually in my conversation with Charles Eisenstein, in which he said, he alluded to what if reality actually, like physically, altering what is possible as you present it to yourself. It's almost like it creates the infinite possibility of things according to what you think is possible, but not just in terms of, the law of attraction, in which you kind of believe that, you get this house and you get this house. What if the laws of physics are such that because a lot of scientists think about them together, that particular thing is true? What if literally the universe conspires to make those particular laws of physics truer than these because there's beings that conjure, that it makes sense to them. So like literally it unfolds into this like space of possibility. Yeah. So I'm just like, but that space is literally infinite in scope. So you can't really land on anything in particular. So when you land on this imagery of God, do you feel that it plays a role in how you live your life, or it doesn't dictate any of it? You just kind of, you have a sense, you have a feeling that that God is a real thing, and then.
Yeah, of course it plays a role in how you live your life. At least for me it does. I try to maintain that this is a spiritual journey. We're in a physical body. So what is it all about? What resonates the most with me is that this is a spiritual evolution taking place where we are trying to master our emotions because we're evolving into creators, into ultimate creators. And you can't be an ultimate creator until you've mastered your emotions, because you got to be able to create without getting so caught up in, this isn't working out, I don't like it, I'm going to destroy the sandcastle, right? So it's leveling up to that point where you can really be completely fair, and really with a lot of integrity and honesty and from your heart. Less so cerebrally, but more so just align. I think
Just being with the present moment and
present moment and like with love, really. I mean, it sounds corny, but it's like it sounds real. I mean, to me, it resonates. I mean, basically, in everything that I've read, I believe the University of Virginia has come up with pretty good proof of reincarnation. I think people with near-death experiences describe similar things like DMT space, where realer than real experience. You have thousands of atheists that have had near-death experiences. They talk about going into the space, judging themselves really, and basically talking about how we come back to Earth in another body to right the wrongs in a certain way.
Can you, I don't want to linger on this for too long because I know it's not your main point, but it is interesting because I heard this before and I actually don't know a lot about what they discovered. Do you know a little bit about it? Like, can you unpack that? Like, what did they actually find? I heard this before, that in the University of Virginia they came up with something that counts for data in the reincarnation.
I mean, the reincarnation thing can go like super deep if like you really want to get into it. I'm curious about your thoughts on the whole concept of the 0-point field. Is that a real thing?
So actually, the only time I heard this term was by Caroline Corey, who I met in Costa Rica. She describes it as like, and you tell me if that's what you mean by that, because she describes them as 0 points that are essentially areas of space-time itself. Those are the coordinates like of the grid, and they're almost like a half black hole, half wormhole that you can use. Either there's different kinds of grids that are composed of 0 points, and you can either navigate, communicate, or utilize them for actually moving your consciousness to like from the higher self to the lower. That's all I know about it. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, it is. I mean, my question to you, because you seem to be interested in physics, is it a tangible thing? Like, is it real? Is it measurable?
It sounds to me like it can make sense. My big thing is that whatever the truth is, it won't go against the grain of what we already know and establish. So like, we have an incomplete picture and we know that, so it should be able to expand on that, but it won't render a lot of what we understand false. It would just add to that.
Yeah.
So if you're telling me that this thing is exactly like a black hole, but it doesn't exhibit all the components of what we know about black holes, then your knowledge is also incomplete. If you, not you personally, but like any person who want to talk about that, I'm big on that, which is like you need to first understand the term you're using.
Yeah.
And it's not semantics. Like the thing actually does a thing, and if the thing you're describing is not doing that thing, and you're not describing why it's not doing that thing, then you don't understand the thing you're talking about. So I'm a big, like, none of the stuff that is occurring in the space of understanding should, in any shape or form, impose or endanger physicalism. Like physicalism is just like one way of looking at the world through things that we can measure, and it's very useful. So if you're telling me that this shape, for example, right, which I know there's a big thing that is coming up right now and in the zeitgeist, which is like, by the way, this is stunning. Shapes like pyramids, right? They have a very particular geometrical thing, and for many reasons. But there's some people who believe, and I'm starting, by the way, to warm up to this idea, that particular shapes have particular influence on the space in which the space that they occupy. So literally, you play like crystals. They have a particular arrangement of the molecules that literally influences the space. Yeah. So if you just tell me, well, this thing has an energy, it's difficult for me, right? But if you're telling me what I just said a second ago, which is that, well, because it has a particular arrangement of the molecules, it influences the space in which it operates, and therefore it changes something in the vibrational field of the space. That makes way more sense to me. Which I feel the reason that I really connect to what you do is because I feel you're also coming at these things from this perspective, which is like it has to connect to what we already understand. And then you can talk about, okay, can this be used for levitation or transportation? Okay, let's talk about it. How? Because if there's extra fields that we're not aware of and we don't know that we should measure them from a physical standpoint, that's fine. Maybe they exist, but we don't know they exist. If we can make a thing happen, then all of a sudden, like you say, if I see a spike in gamma because certain crystals are present, to me, I know, I understand what you're saying. A lot of scientists will ignore that. I would never ignore that. I'd be like, okay, wow, how do we amplify this, right? And I think that the problem from the scientific community is that there's this like very myopic insistence that no, I'm only going to worry about my little subject because that's the only thing I can be an expert in, and it's confused for humility. It's confused. It's not. There's nothing humble about that. You're just essentially saying there's no way I can know. So you're limiting yourself as the scope of a true scientist.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it answers your question, but my thought on 0 point is that if it connects to what we understand about space, if you're talking in physical terms, then let's test this.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can actually like bring it into. I personally think Caroline Corey looked at the laser. She doesn't do psychedelics, but she looked at it. She saw. I know she saw what is in there because she described structures to me that I didn't tell her exist, and she could describe them. So I know she's for real.
Yeah.
And then she told me a few interesting things. But she said, first of all, it's uploading itself into your brain. Mm-hmm. So it makes you understand it better as time goes by. Mm-hmm. And she said, there's going to be a point in which there's going to be like a shift.
Yeah.
And you start understanding a lot of it, and you'll be able to, to create a language that basically makes us understand how to operate this thing. Now, I don't know how much of that I take on board, maybe. And it sounds awesome if it would happen. But here's the thing that I think that is testable. First of all, the reason I mentioned that is because she said that the laser is a 0 point. She said that the laser is actually like when it's projected on a thing, it opens again. It's a 0 point of communication, and you can actually utilize it to speak certain things into existence.
Yeah, so the reason why I asked you about the 0 point field is because there's a fellow, I think out of Germany, named Joachim Kepler, and he has like one of the most elegant theories regarding tying in, I guess, neurochemistry, brain oscillations, and the 0 point field. And he thinks that the brain is a read-write head of the 0 point field, and all experiences, information exists in the 0 point field, and our brains are constantly reading and writing on that background field like all the time. And it's basically like a phone on 5G where it's like you can't tell whether it's on the phone, but because the connection is so fast, right? That's basically what he's positing, is that our brain is constantly interacting with this field at such a fluid manner that we think it's taking place inside the brain, but it's actually in the field, and we're just reading and writing that information.
Oh, okay. Then I fully agree with that.
Yeah, so I don't know. It sounds like a great, interesting theory. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounds really intriguing. And the reason why I bring this up because we're talking about reincarnation, right? The whole concept of reincarnation. And Kepler talks about certain brainwaves seem to be tied in with tighter correlations of reading the 0 point field. And when people do psychedelics, ayahuasca, DMT, they become open to the concept of reincarnation. Some people even describe seeing themselves in what they believe to be a past life. Not just that, you have the near-death experience where you have people who didn't believe in anything mystical. A lot of times they see either their past lives or future lives, or become open to the concept of returning back into the world to change their karma or whatever it is. You have the whole hypnotic regression aspect where supposedly people are regressed to an earlier point in their life, and then like let's say, Danny, we regress you. How far can you remember back to being a child?
I remember very, very, like nobody believes me, but I remember the walls of where I was born. Like
the
in
womb?
No, not that far. In the hospital.
Okay. Well, let's say
and then it's patchy, but I remember from 1 years old. I remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go further back, and they since you remember that consciously, they would take you back to the womb. They would like regress you, and obviously they're going to put you in an altered state.
So are you following the field onto what is written on it back to? So the memories are not in your brain, according to this theory. It's in the field itself.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is that, okay, so then you have kids, right, who at the University of Virginia, they have a few thousand case studies of kids who vividly start discussing a life that the parents didn't expose them to, that the kid was obviously never privy to, that information. Ian Stevenson did research on this for decades. Jim Tucker does it on now. He does the research. He does the research regarding the kid, who he's talking about, public records of the person that they're talking about, and then they match them up. And they have like 1,000 case studies or a couple thousand case studies of that. Stevenson even wrote a book called Reincarnation in Biology, where a kid will have like a birth deformity, like part of his jaw missing, and the kid will start talking about a past life where he got his jaw shot off. And then there's public record of that person actually getting their jaw shot off. So what I'm saying is that kids, interestingly enough, I'm going to be releasing a video presentation about this. Kids, where are their brain waves looking like? Their gamma waves are off the charts. Like, they're just crazy, like high-level meditator gamma waves, but kids are naturally born with that, and it peaks at about 5 years old, and then it just drops off. So what I'm saying is that if there is a mechanisms to recall past lives based on Kepler's sort of theory about all information being in the 0-point field, it would have to be coinciding with a certain brain oscillation. It would have to be coinciding with specific brain activity. And this brain activity takes place during near-death experiences. We see in the gamma spike based on the animal studies, based on even a case study in 2022 where they had an 80-some-year-old man hooked up to EEG while he died. And it was like a huge gamma spike.
Oh, by mistake, right?
By mistake,
I've seen
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Ayahuasca, DMT, same thing, gamma. Hypnotic states, same thing, gamma. Obviously, the kids I just mentioned, gamma. So what I'm saying is that there seem to be physiological correlates to this weird recollection. And what's interesting is that when somebody has Alzheimer's disease, they have like completely suppressed gamma. So gamma has been identified
So it's
as
almost
like,
sorry, I'm cutting you off. So it's I really want to understand. So it's like a gamma, some correlated to being able to see, like read from the field, basically. So you remember.
that's what it's alluding to, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, that's what it's, and it seems to be even overshoots, right? Of if you have too much gamma, quote unquote, too much, you're starting to see stuff that doesn't even coincide with this reality. You're seeing even deeper, and when you have it so suppressed, you don't even remember your own name, right? So like,
Does gamma spike with DMT? Like,
yeah,
did they measure this?
yeah, of course it does. Yeah, they've seen that in animal studies, intracranial EEG, which is like this year. They haven't even published the study, but I saw the data. So they're going to be publishing that, yeah, sometime this year. Actually, it's 2023, so they did the study last year in 22. They saw a huge gamma spike from intracranial EEG measurement. That's like top of the line EEG. But they've also seen this in human studies as well.
So this actually makes perfect sense to me, first of all. Second of all, I think you sent me a paper by, what's his name again?
Kepler?
Yeah,
Kepler?
I read. Yeah. Actually, I read a couple of papers, but he's actually a very interesting dude. It's very similar to morphic resonance. That the idea that the universe remembers. So like if you have a species that developed this ability on one side of the world, all of a sudden the same species on the other side of the world somehow knows how to do that. Like they measured with monkeys, like certain usages of tools, and so this idea is
the information is in the field.
in the field. Yes,
So it's like, how do you get that information?
So what is okay? I see.
So you have your baseline consciousness. You're not remembering any past lives. But when somebody has a near-death experience, magically they're, open to this stuff. Is there, like, oscillations different? Yes, right? Like, is there oscillations different when they're doing DMT and ayahuasca? Yes. Is it different when they're having hypnotic states? Yes. What about kids? Why are they remembering it? Yes, different, right? So is there overlap between all of them? And it seems that it's yes.
Wow. Okay,
So that's what I'm saying. So the concept of reincarnation seems more plausible, because you're way outside of baseline consciousness and you're having these recollections of potential reincarnation, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's the way that I look at things. Is there a lot of overlap, or is there overlap in terms of people describing something, and is the differences in their brain frequencies overlapping with one another?
Yeah.
Is that a commonality?
That's a big one.
So if that's a commonality, then it's like, well, where does the information reside?
Exactly.
And that's what I'm saying. Kepler he didn't come up with a 0-point field, but he's coming up with the neurological correlates that seem to tie into 0-point field access to a certain extent. And it's an interesting theory. It's going to take time to prove or disprove or whatnot, but I think we need to come up with the most plausible mechanisms based on the science of today, to see if we can try to explain these really what's considered esoteric concepts, right?
I forgot that it's a big concept that he uses. No, I actually really like the way he writes and thinks, and I forgot that he uses that term.
Yeah.
It also makes perfect sense to me in the sense of if reincarnation, so the signature of who you are in any single life would still have to be encoded in the field, but in a way that is more kind of like constructed as a one thing that is like a thing, right? Like you're a person. So that core, that signature carries itself through. A lot of it is being disassembled, dismantled when you die, and the information is still kept in the field. But there's a core essence of the signature that maintains itself, and that is the reincarnation. That's the soul. That's the thing that comprises the thing that continues on beyond the one life. And that, by the way, that also makes sense to me in the sense of the God asking the question, because it's all of those data points. The essences carry themselves through from the beginning of time till the end of time, and basically they remerge with with God and become the understanding of God. Like God is trying to understand essentially.
Yeah, I mean, there's a theory that, once we mature enough emotionally and spiritually, then you no longer have to reincarnate on Earth. It's a big school. That's one perspective that resonates with me, is that school is
Nirvana.
school is a very difficult training ground, and we use it to evolve, at a very accelerated pace, because it's so difficult, because we can get tied into the physical and pleasure. We can forget why we came here. It's almost like a recon mission, right? Like if you're in the military and you train to go ahead and go overseas for a certain mission, and then you get caught up in like whatever the pleasures of that country, and you forget what you came to do. And it seems like that takes place here like a lot. And people forget why we're really here. And I believe, it's just my personal belief. I'm not a scientist, so I don't speak for scientists involved with DMT Quest at all on any of these topics. So I do believe that we are here to evolve as spiritual beings, and learn to have more harmony within the self, and more harmony with the planet, and more harmony with others. I mean, we're all not perfect, obviously, but it's something to strive for. And I think that it's something that it's a difficult challenge being on Earth, but we try.
I actually second all of that. I really like that vision, and I really think there's good reasons to believe that is in fact the case. You're right. This is not something that you want to mention too much around scientific circles, but we're allowed to postulate and just have fun with our thoughts, and I very much connect to what you just said. Before we start wrapping up, I want to understand one thing. This whole journey of like the deeper journey of what we're here to do, aside from healing and helping each other, we all seem to have this almost like unique abilities, like unique signatures that we are. Each one of us is like focused on a different thing, and it seems to be innate. It seems to be natural to who we are. If you would have to encapsulate it in a word or a phrase, and I know it's a high task here, but what would you say would be yours?
I mean, a communicative bridge would be one, but I've heard a prophecy that there would be one religion in the future. And to me, I believe it's the most natural thing to be tied in biology, because all humans would exude DMT. And instead of worshiping fragmented religions, no disrespect to any religions out there, I think they all have really great aspects to them, but we should be a little bit more unified in our quest for what spirituality really is. And I think just like, there was maps, really accurate maps built before there was satellites and planes. Like, I'm sure you've seen maps like 1700s, 1800s that were really accurate. I think we as a global community can start to build a map of the greater reality and the afterlife in a very comprehensive way if we all came together and put aside like the standard religious aspect and just pure exploratory aspects as a global community. I think that's really something that excites me, is not necessarily creating any new religion, because I don't even like to use the word religion, but just openness to everybody being more comfortable discussing esoteric concepts. Because the more information we have, the more data goes into the picture of what this really is. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I really connect to the way you carry yourself and your message. And I have to say that I'm learning a lot from how you conduct yourself in that space, because I'm somewhat of a newcomer to this whole endeavor, and I never really thought that I'm going to find myself in a position where I hoped for it, but I never thought I'm going to find myself in a position in which I will help to move the dial, that I really hope help to move the dial in our understanding. But more than that, I never thought that I'm going to find myself in a position in which I'm actually deeply interested in how it helps us grow. And it sounds like what am I even talking about? But no, yes, of course, I'm always striving for good, and I want to be a good person. But there was never really a deep interest of mine of how is it that other people's lives is better. I don't want to impose on their lives in a way that makes it worse, for sure. But it was never like a thing that always occurs, like, oh, how can I help, right? If I see a situation in which I know I can help, I will absolutely immediately help. But my mind would never seek the opportunities to help. And now all of a sudden, because when I discovered the laser thing, I was like, the first thing that came to me, because it felt like a big responsibility, I felt like, what is the cash value? How does it help us to know this? Because maybe there's certain knowledges that, better not knowing. And my mind, the mind was struggling with it, but the heart was complete. And I later realized that the reason for that is because it would not be available to see it unless we would need to see it. But more than that, if we are here, which I fully agree with you, because I have this very strong intuition too, if we are here to grow and become more, then nothing that happens in the space can go against that. So there's things that can, slow you down, but the things that are available as content they all seem to be designed to help us become more. Even the challenges, especially the challenges. Somebody also on my podcast, very interesting guy, he said, hell is for the spiritually ambitious. And I thought that was very profound.
Yeah. That's where you grow the most, right?
Yeah. Zach Murdoch. Yeah. So when he was on my podcast, he said, hell is for the spiritually ambitious. And I thought, wow, it's been a while since I heard a phrase, and I was like, wow, that's profound.
Yeah.
Because in the end of the day, whatever it is, it's there to help us grow. So I really connect to the way you do things, because you take into account not just you're interested in the mechanisms, but you don't just look at them as for their own right. You look at how it influences other people, and then you think very carefully about how this information is received.
Yeah.
And that's a giant one.
Well, I mean, I'm not into mental masturbation, right? Mental masturbation is overrated, and unfortunately, I've noticed that a lot in certain spaces where people just like to hear themselves talk and get the accolades, and that's not really what it's about. It's about pushing it to the point where, imagine a whole society across the whole world who had no fear of death. How would they live, right? If they weren't so scared to die, how would they treat others? How would they consume, right? People talk about an overpopulated planet. What if we had consumption down by 50%? That's the equivalent of half the population, right? So people talk about going to Mars, all this other stuff, but I think it's about creating awakenings on a global level, and that's how you heal the planet, because the perspectives change, right? Consumption patterns change. The level of overall fear changes, and that's really what I think needs to change. And I think that's a big part of what this is all about. incrementally, right? What you're doing, what I'm doing, what thousands or millions of other people are doing in this space, all incrementally have the potential to work towards that. Whereas a shift in perspective, a greater perspective, you know. And that has to be like eyes on the prize, right? Eventually. Imagine if you could heal yourself with the mind of every disease. And if you do die, you're still not scared, right? You're still not scared to die. If you're incapable of healing, that was just your karma or whatever. That was in the books for you. You have to be comfortable with all those things. And that's really, I come to the point in my life where I do feel like that. And it's such a sense of peace. I would want to give that to others, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the biggest things with my awakening experience was, yeah, you know, the supernormal stuff, but ultimately it was a sense of peace. It was a sense of like deep presence, and it was a sense of something greater, the whole force, right? Like, oh, this is real amazing. And learning to overcome the fear of death, like at a very deep level, right? Not like, I'm a tough guy, I'm not scared to die. It's more like, I'm ready to die at any minute. And there's a certain level of comfort in that, you know, that allows me to live the way I'm living, right? And kind of, I truly feel free in a lot of ways that I feel is a gift. And to get that gift is to, for me, I feel like you'd want to give that to others.
What was the experience, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, like I said, it was a deep cleanse experience, but ultimately it was, yeah, it was an instantaneous sensation of a greater force that I'd never felt before. So some people, they describe seeing God or hearing God in their near-death experiences or transcendental experiences, but for me it was just an undeniable force that I can't really describe it. Like, it's really difficult to describe. It's almost like you had like strong magnets everywhere and you just felt like a force, like, and I don't know why, you know, it came to my head that it was the force of the creator or whatnot, but that's the only thing that came up. But also at the same time, like a deep euphoric feeling. So it was like both of them happening at the same time, where it was like, either I'm hella delusional or it's like it's really happening, and you know, maybe it's a little bit of both, but nevertheless I had a lasting impact. And I feel like I've changed for the better, and I don't know, maybe not, I don't know, man. Like, I'm just on this journey, and I'm just grateful for the experience. But yeah, if you want to hear like all the nitty-gritty details of that experience, you can check out Dr. Edith Ubuntu Chen and John Chavez, the DMT interview experience. That's where I go into the nitty-gritty of the specific details of that experience. But
First of all, I will definitely check it out, and I will also leave a link in the description. I will only say that I can feel it from you, and it's a sticking point for me at this point, that the experience itself. So the one thing that does not require justification is our first-person experience. It's the one example, maybe the only example in the universe, which is it's an N of one because you have no other access to anybody else's experience. But it's the one that you have zero need for justification. There's something about the fact that you're experiencing that you just know that you're experiencing.
yeah,
The question, how do you know you experience, doesn't make any sense, because experience is all you have to, experiencing is all you have to experience
yeah, it is
to
what
know
it
that
is.
that's ultimately. So if you have an experience of, like you said, there's the magnetic fields, it's like, so the content of the experience for people is only the question, because I feel like we're always trying to compare with each other. We're always trying to see, are you like me inside of there? Like, are we the same in that way?
Yeah.
I think that really what it is, it's a reaching out. Even if people don't realize this, it's a reaching out to know that we're not alone. And in the end, this whole idea that we're all one, sure, maybe in the ultimate grand scheme of things, I'm very open to this idea, but and on this level, we do feel separate, and because of that, we feel alienated. So feeling like somebody else is here who are like me or even close to being like me. There's something very comforting about that. But I think that what matters is how that experience makes you live your life.
Yeah.
And if you feel that it changed you for the better, that's all that matters. You know, Charles Eisenstein, when we were hanging out one time, he said, "Do you know anything about the Mandelbrot set?" And I said, "You mean like in chaos theory?" And he's like, "Yeah, like chaos theory in general." I'm like, "Well, you know, I actually read quite a bit about it because I was fascinated by those." You know so you know the geometric shapes, the one that kind of spiral in and all that stuff that it zooms into infinity. You know what I'm talking about? So that original thing that looks like a beetle, that's the Mandelbrot set.
Okay.
It's a very particular shape that arises from a very simple equation, and it seems to be the map that contains all the stable structures of those fractals. Anything outside of the beetle, outside of the Mandelbrot set, flies into infinity, and anything inside of it maintains some structure. The interesting part is in the margins where it's chaos. It's where it's almost flying into infinity, but it isn't. So it stays into those, and the most creative, most unique shapes exist right on the margin. Doesn't it sound familiar? Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's pure mathematics. And he asked me about that, and then an answer came to me that I never thought about before. And the answer that came to me was, he asked me, "What about it? Like, what do you feel about, you know, the infinity of it?" I don't even know if you emphasized the infinity, but that's, I guess, when my brain went. And I said, the buck stops where you're trying to do work. Because it is infinite. But wherever you happen to find yourself in this infinity, there's a region in which you operate and you're trying to do something. In any capacity, physical, spiritual, whatever it is, your experience is trying to interact with this tiny space. So wherever you stop to actually try and combine points and make something happen, that's where the buck stops. And for everybody, it's different. And for everybody, it's different to a different degree. And so in the end, with all this craziness and all those, like you said, mental masturbation, because that's infinite, right? What is the trail you left behind?
Impact.
Yes. How do people feel when you leave the room? How do people feel when you enter the room? What is your relationship with your parents? If the answer to all those questions, okay, not great, it doesn't matter what you understand or you think you understand about the world. There's something off about how you operate in the space that you're in. And that's a big emphasis point for me, because I know that for a long time in my life, the answer I got to these questions, I didn't like the answer I got to these questions if I really asked myself. So I knew that the thing that matters is that.
Yeah.
Like, what does it actually feel like to be you, to be around you? What is the thing you're adding to the thing?
Yeah.
And because of that, everything you're saying resonates very deeply. Like it's a very, like, I feel the weight and I don't know if it was like that for you, but even when you were talking, there was this, all of a sudden just this stillness descended into the room. There was like this very deep, it's almost like the world said, pay attention.
Yeah, it's such a humbling experience, you know, like, I never forget it, like, ever. You never forget it. You never forget the feeling, and you never, I can't really put it into words, man, but I'm just grateful for it, that it occurred, because it just gives you real, at least for me, it gave me true perspective on how little I know about life, and to always remember that, you know, never, feel like I don't feel important, but I feel the mission is.
I don't feel important, but I feel the mission is.
And that's where it goes back to the mental masturbation aspect, where it's like people feel like they are the importance, but the importance is like the effect on the world, right? That's the ultimate importance. So you should be able to do that without your name attached to it. And that's where, like, for me, sometimes I do feel like I wish I could go back to anonymous blog, anonymity, or however you say that word, because I don't care about anything in terms of credit, but the way the world is structured, you have to be out there. I'm trying to fundraise and get all this stuff done. Like, I just have to do it, right? Like, but I'm not in it for me at all. Like,
But you can enjoy it, right?
absolutely, and I am. Trust me.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know that I am,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's not for that. It doesn't mean that I can't. It's just so always. What I'm getting at is in terms of the humbling experience. Always keep me grounded like that. I always go back to that. Where it's like, not that you ain't shit. It's just like, come on, man. Like, you got blessed with an experience. That's all it was. So let's get some work done. Let's try to, mold the world into something that seems to benefit some folks.
Let's get some work done, man. Uh,
That's what it is, man.
John, I can't thank you enough for both welcoming me and my partner into your place and cooking an amazing dinner for us. And really, like, I feel honored to know you and call you a friend, but also to like be a part of the environment that you are creating, which is the psychedelic space and the communication around it. And I always learn something when I talk to you.
Vice versa, man.
Yeah,
Vice versa.
so-
The perspectives they come from such different places that it's magic in the making when we talk. So it's a beautiful thing, man.
I appreciate you, man.
Thanks so much, brother.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you,
Yeah,
man.
we'll talk again, I hope, very soon.
For sure, man. Well, one thing I want to say before we cut the cameras
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that the magnetic device that you design, that's going to be one of the biggest research projects of 2023. Like, the world, I don't know if the world's ready for that, but they better be, because it's happening. Andreas is going to be on it. We're going to get him involved.
Andres Gomez?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the most exciting things. You were on it like that, and that's where I was like, all right, I can work with you, Danny, because I've gotten thousands of emails from so many people saying that they could do this, that, or the other, and they don't produce anything. And within a week, you were on that.
Not a week. I appreciate it. Took me like a month.
Close
plus,
enough,
but yeah,
man.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
were
yeah.
on that, and I was impressed by that because it shows me that somebody's a seeker like me and hungry to really get some cutting edge stuff done. And I'm in it for moving the needle, and that's definitely a needle mover. So
I appreciate it, man. And
Yeah.
and I see a brother in arms in you, and I know for a fact that also it's not a coincidence. And the things, what I discovered, and this thing that you're trying to get off the ground right now, in addition to everything else that you're doing, will be deeply connected in a very direct way. It's very clear to me that the magnetic research and the electromagnetic. Do you want to describe to people what it is, or you want to?
Yeah, well, the Persinger study was a case study of people that were able to perceive rotating magnetic fields while under the influence of LSD. So the significance of that is the notion that you take 10 sober people, put them in a completely dark room, you rotate magnetic fields and they can't see anything. And then you put 10 people under the influence of LSD and you expose them to rotating magnetic fields and they can perceive it. So the importance of that is that it indicates that people are able to perceive tangible aspects of the magnetic field. So it's alluding to the notion that maybe the visual spectrum is actually expanded during psychedelic spaces. And that alludes to the notion that maybe the psychedelic experience is actually taking place in something that's real, but we can't see it with our baseline consciousness because we don't have the proper oscillations. So we're going to be attempting to replicate a study like that where Andreas is, you and I are just the facilitators of this. You played a big role in creating the device to do so.
No. I mean, Andres is like a scientist.
Yeah,
So,
right. We're all in it together, man. And I'm sure he would say the same thing. He's a very humble man. I love him. But he's going to be looking at the potentiality to perceive those rotating magnetic fields with 5-MeO, DMT, ayahuasca. And I think at some point, we should even integrate these rotating magnetic field perception in extended darkroom. Because darkroom experiences are hypothesized to upregulate endogenous DMT and endogenous 5-MeO. So that needs to be in play as well. It can't just be exogenous psychedelics. We have to include the endogenous psychedelic research aspects as well. But all this alludes to the fact that there's more to reality and it can be measured tangibly. And that's really what's really exciting about that specific project. So
I'm
Yeah.
very excited. Yeah, it was fun to just play with it and build it because I also don't have a lot of experience in building things, but I'm getting more used to it and it's fun.
It's all about the drive, man. You
Yeah.
know, that's the thing. You have the drive to do it, and you made it happen.
Yeah. One thing I do want to mention, if we're already talking about like future prospects, I think I told you this, but one of the things that came up in the same way that I arrived at the idea that it needs to be somehow 650 nanometer diffracted laser, in the same way, you know, I've gathered some information here and there, and it looks like projecting the laser through particular materials, specifically bismuth, seems to be like it's supposed to be doing something. I don't know what it is yet because I'm waiting for. I spoke to the scientist from England who is actually very busy because he's working on his own theory. But he said the second he's going to have a second, he has a machine in, I think he said in London, that cuts materials very, very thin. Because bismuth is opaque, so he said he's going to send me basically like a micron thick, bismuth, so I can actually project it through it. But there's something that, and I'm just going to be spitballing here, but there's something that has to do with water, bismuth, and your magnetic field. So I think that there's something about creating the rotating magnetic field and then projecting the laser through a material in the middle of it. It's a wild guess, but something tells me that there's something there because the control of the rotating magnetic fields might actually create a certain oscillation, a certain wave that will influence the material in such a way that then the laser will reveal, and then we'll be able to. I actually don't know how the water comes into this picture. I know that, by the way, if you if you project the laser through a glass of water, I've only recently discovered this. It actually in the glass, in the way that it reflects, there's like areas where you can see the reflection, and also the way it falls on the surface beyond. It becomes, what you see in the laser becomes way more coherent. So I don't know if the material will also have to be submerged in water.
Yeah.
I don't know, but like that, I really want to play with those ideas. That's why I feel like the whole thing just like comes together, and it might be a complete dud. It might be just like a quick. All I know is it will look really cool. It will look fucking amazing. 2 rotating magnets with a laser in the middle and a fucking. And you know what's gonna be even more cool? If we do magnetic levitation for the material, it's just like suspended in the air with the laser projected through it. Like, if nothing else, bro, it's gonna look insane. It's gonna look fucking amazing.
I love it, man.
So yeah, John, listen. Again, deep honor, and thank you for doing this. And here's for many more conversations. Off camera, on camera, and forever onwards, man.
Yeah, man. Time to eat, man. Let me get the
Fuck
cooking.
yeah. Bro.
All right, what do you want?